at least 3 ethical dilemmas that occur when practicing psychology in organizational settings, 4 common ethical duties, obligations, and values of psychologists, and to be able to apply ethical standards to cases. And we'll have a case or two that you'll have an opportunity to practice that. Now, if you should, in your breakout groups or in asking questions or whatever, talk about situations, we ask you to protect the specific identity of real life case material so that people may know what company you're talking about. So we ask you not to do that. As you have a chance, actively participate in your breakout groups. There are no bad questions, so feel free in the chat room or when we have Q&A to ask questions. And remember, in the field of ethics, often there is more than one right answer. Sometimes there isn't, sometimes there's only one, but sometimes there is. Now, a little bit about myself. I have trained as an industrial, organizational, and clinical psychologist at Michigan State University, and I have spent my career in consulting psychology, both as an academic, as a practitioner, as a manager and leader as well. And ethics is one of the areas I've had special interest in throughout my career. I served on the ethics committee of the American Psychological Association early in my career, and I've written a lot about ethical issues, particularly in IO and consulting psychology. Now, to get us in the right frame of mind, I want you on your own and in your mind to ask, how would you complete this sentence? To me, an ethical person is one who what? Think about how you would personally complete that sentence. To me, an ethical person is one who. And I want to show you some responses from other people when they have been asked this. One said, an ethical person is one who follows the ethic of reciprocity. That is, one should treat others as one would like others to be treated. Someone else said they know and understand what is considered right and wrong, and they act accordingly. Under difficult situations, they take actions with the result in the greater good or the least amount of harm. And someone else said, someone who is honest, admirable, and influential with their morals and values is one who is considerate of other people's feelings and situations. And another said, who doesn't show favoritism. So you see, people have different answers to that question. It's important for you to understand what your thinking is about what constitutes an ethical person. Now, here in America, we have a national hero. We just celebrated a national holiday in honor of him. His name is Martin Luther King. He was a major advocate, activist for civil rights, made great progress in the United States in advancing the cause of people of color, particularly African Americans. And he is still revered as someone who was seen as being highly ethical in his activities to try to advance a group of people who had been treated, and to some degree still are, not very well. So we're going to show just a very short clip of a speech, part of a speech that he gave, the only speech he ever gave to the American Psychological Association. And we're just going to show a segment about it to get us in the mood of thinking about ethics. So I am going to unshare my screen so we can have that shown. So just 1 second. Are we ready with the clip?
Prof, I'm sharing now.
Okay, great.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. It is the ringing cry of modern child psychology, maladjusted. Now, of course, we all want to live the well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities. But as I move toward my conclusion, I would like to say to you today, in a very honest manner, that there are some things in our society and some things in our world for which I'm proud to be maladjusted. And I call upon all men of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized. I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few and leave millions of God's children smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society.
And help welcome our honored, distinguished.
We're gonna go back now to these slides. And so you hear an example. He was someone, and you see why he might have been regarded as a great hero for American society and did a great deal to advance things. Let's start with the question also about what is ethics anyway? Well, if we look at it in its historical context, ethics is one branch of philosophy. Philosophy comes from the Greek, meaning love of wisdom. And philosophy itself has to do with the study of knowledge and reality and values. In ethics, it has to do with the right and wrong of behavior, morality, or what I should or should not do. And for the most part, ethics is not empirically derived. It's rather based on judgments that people make about what is the good, what is evil, what is the right thing to do, and what is not. Now, most of you are studying to be in a profession, or you are already in a profession as a professor. And so we ask, what is a profession? Since that's what you're preparing yourselves to be. And I'd offer you this definition, that a profession is an occupation that requires an extensive academic preparation, that there is an organized field of knowledge and competencies, that you have to have supervised experience to become a member of it. And your behavior is often overseen by other professionals, by peer regulation and oversight. And in addition to that, there is typically regulation of the profession by government and other bodies. Within that guideline, that background, professionals are given a lot of autonomy. But one of the things that makes a profession is that they have a code of ethics. And the ethics is what members of the profession agree to abide by as part of the entry ticket, if you will, to the profession. And if you think about most widely recognized professions, including medical doctor, attorney, psychologist, nurses, and so forth, all of those have codes of ethics. All of them have professional bodies. And if you do something wrong and you're brought up for doing that, it would be a body of peers that would evaluate your behavior as a professional. Now, professional ethics are not new. Many of you have heard about medicine's Hippocratic Oath, which dates back to the 5th century BC. And if we look at that, what's in that Hippocratic Oath, it includes the following: I will fulfill according to my ability and judgment this oath and this covenant. I will apply, and I've put in some words to clarify some of the earlier meaning. I will apply prescriptive measures for the benefit of the sick according to my ability and judgment. So why do you do this? You're doing this to help people, in this case, sick people, and you do it with ability and judgment, and that's what we would today call competence. I will keep them from harm and justice. This is the so-called do no harm that is in most professional codes of ethics. I will neither give a drug to induce death to anyone who asks for it. In other words, no mercy killing, nor will I make a suggestion to that effect. Similarly, I will not give to a woman an abortive remedy. I think are you hearing me?
Yes, Prof. Just now it was muted, but now we can hear you.
Okay, it looked like I got muted somehow there. Whatever houses I may visit, I will come for the benefit of the sick, remaining free of all intentional injustice, of all mischief, and in particular of sexual relationships, both male and female, or whether they be free or slaves. When I see or hear in the course of treatment, or even outside of the treatment, with regard to the life of men, which on no account one must spread abroad, I will keep to myself confidentiality. And if I fulfill this oath and do not violate it, it may be granted to me to enjoy all these good things, fame among men, etc. But if I transgress it and swear falsely, may the opposite of all this be my lot. So way back in the 5th century BC, we have a code of ethics that is not that dissimilar to the modern codes of ethics in medicine and psychology. Now, we are going to be talking today about the ethics code of the American Psychologists, the American Psychological Association. I think we're getting a little... Okay. And why are we talking about that code? We're talking about that code because that is the code that you use, I'm told, in Malaysia for industrial organizational psychology. There is a separate code for clinical psychology, but if you read that code, you find it's almost identical to the one for what's called the APA. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. And this is the one that I believe that you are held accountable to. But within the APA, which is a very large association of psychologists, over 130,000 members and student members, it was founded in 1892, but it did not even have an ethics code until 1953. Now, I understand that you guys have been asked to read the APA ethics code, and that you have studied it perhaps in some of your classes. And so we're going to take a little quiz. It's only 6 questions, and they're true and false. And so I'm going to stop my share and get some assistance here, and we're going to ask you these questions one at a time, and then we'll briefly discuss them one at a time. So these are out of the code. And you will see in just a second the first question pop up. Do I need to do anything? What do we have the... Are we ready? Can somebody tell me if the questions are gonna pop up? Professor Tom?
Yeah. We are waiting for the participant to join the quiz first. Then only we will start the questions. Yeah.
Okay,
now-
so
Now we
they
only
have to
have
join?
45. Yeah.
Ah,
Right. Yeah. So all the
okay.
participants have to sign in the game code, and then we will show the questions shortly.
Okay, all right. Once they're signed in, we'll be able to go through all of them. They'll be already signed in for all the questions.
So far, we have 90 participants here. So we would like to encourage all the participants to kindly join this quiz.
Should.
We are about to start it already.
Okay, great. So here's the first question. The principles of the APA Ethics Code are directly enforceable, and that's a true or false question.
We're still awaiting responses.
I think, shall we stop there? Oh, we're still getting some.
Yes.
Okay, we have almost everybody. Anybody else who wants to answer, please do so now.
A few more responses.
Yeah, let me tell you what the right answer was. There are a right answer to all of these. I regret to inform you, 81 of you, that the correct answer here is false. Let me explain, and don't worry about if you didn't get it right. But the principles are the first part of the ethics code, and they identify overarching values and the general foundation of the code, but they are not directly enforceable. It is the standards of the code that are enforceable. And we'll show you an example of that in just a moment. So let's go to the next one. Thanks for participating in that one. Yes, proceed. Now, the next question. True, false. The APA Ethics Code requires that psychologists do no harm. Almost there. Anybody else? Go ahead and put your answers in. Any more? Well, I think we have almost everybody. So sorry again, answer to this question is false. This requires a little subtlety, but it's a very important point that people often miss. And that is, what it requires is not that you do no harm, but that you minimize harm. For example, if you think about a doctor doing a medical treatment or a surgery, there may be perceived harm because there was pain associated with the procedure. The point is not that they do no harm, but they maximize good and that they minimize harm. And in organizational psychology work, for example, if you design a well-validated selection procedure, the people that get rejected by that test may perceive themselves as having had harm done to them. But it is overall for the good if you result in people being selected who are better qualified for the job in a fair and objective kind of way. So that's a little tricky one, but hopefully you remember that it's not that we say it's okay to do harm, but that you minimize harm. And oftentimes there will be perceived harm anyway that is associated with the things that we do. Let's move on now to the next question, please. Okay. All right, the next question is, when consulting psychologists are engaged in pre-employment or security testing, third-party arrangements may circumvent the requirements that psychologists explain the results directly to the people taking the test. So in other words, is it an ethical mandate in the ethics code if you're doing pre-employment testing or security testing or job-related testing? Is it an ethical requirement that you provide, that you explain the results to the individual? So the question is written where, may circumvent, that means they may not have to provide that according to the code. Okay, we have almost everybody. Get to 100. Okay, the correct answer to this is true. And what the code says is that if you're doing testing for selection purposes, then you may not have to provide results, whereas in other kind of testing you do. You have to read it carefully though, because it very importantly, it says, and you explain that to people in advance. So people agreed to do that, then that is permissible. May not be a good idea, but it is allowable under the code. Let's move on. Okay, we'll do two more and then we'll stop. Okay, the next one is about multiple relationships. And this one says multiple relationships, though not per se unethical, generally should be avoided in consulting psychology or IO psychology. Yes or no? Okay, we're pretty evenly split on this one. Okay, we're at 100. I'm going to stop there. It is correct that multiple relationships are not per se unethical. It is not correct that they generally should be avoided in organizational psychology. So the correct answer to that was false. Why is that the case? In organizational psychology, we have multiple relationships all the time. If you're coaching somebody and you also have responsibilities to their boss or to the organization, if you're doing consulting work and the organization is the client, but you're working with employees within it, you are in multiple relationship. And that's part of what we do. It's a little bit different than clinical psych, but even in family therapy, you often have multiple relationships. So for us, the important thing is that we recognize what these relationships are and that we make clear to everybody up front what our responsibilities are to each party that's involved in it. More in a minute on that. And we'll do one more question and then we're going to move on. Okay, last question. An organization or group can consent to psychological services, true or false? So this one, very, the trues are beating out the falses. Okay. I think we'll stop here because we have a very lopsided result. And the lopsided result is the correct answer. This is true, that not only can they consent to it, but you have to gather their consent when they are the client. And so if you look at the current version of the APA ethics code, it is filled with references to groups and organizations and consulting and so forth. And so, yes, they can. And if they do have the ability to consent, then you have to figure out how that's going to be done. Thank you so much for sharing the questions here. And I'm going to go back to my slides if we can. I can do that. We're going to skip the last one. Okay. Can I go ahead and, yeah, yes. Okay. Oops. Okay, so now, to whom does the APA code apply if you're a psychologist? it applies for all of these things, and I've bold-faced the areas. If you're developing assessment instruments, if you're doing organizational consulting, conducting assessments, research, teaching, then it applies to you. And these activities are distinguished from purely private activities, but most anything you do as a psychologist is covered by the code. Now, the structure of the code, we've talked a little bit about it already. It has 5 principles that identify general purpose and values. Those are not per se enforceable, but they should be part of the ethical decision-making process. And then there are 10 standards with many subparts that basically are the behavioral requirements, thou shalt or thou shalt not. Now, here's an example of a principle. Principle A is called beneficence and non-maleficence. Those are tricky words to pronounce, but they say psychologists strive to benefit those with whom they work and take care to do no harm. Well, didn't we just say that wasn't said in the code? Well, this is in the principle, and in the standard, which is the enforceable part, it says you minimize harm. Now, clearly, we'd like to avoid doing harm, but there are many situations where we can't do that. And then we still have to maximize good, but we have to minimize harm when that is inevitable. And we also seek to safeguard the welfare and rights of those with whom we interact professionally and other affected persons. And it goes on from there. And then it also says here that we avoid or minimize harm. So that's what a principle looks like. This is what a standard looks like. And the standard's very specific. Can you barter? That is, let's say you were consulting with a startup organization. Could you accept stock in lieu of money for payment? And what this says is that barter defines it as the acceptance of goods, services, or other non-monetary remuneration from clients, patients in return for psychological services. You can barter only if it is not clinically contraindicated, that is only if it won't damage the relationship and the resulting arrangement is not exploitative. If, for example, you said, well, I'll trade my services for real estate services, you might be putting yourself in a situation that would be conflictual. Now, the psychologist is not just given a rule book. The psychologist has to use judgment. That's in the code. It says that whenever it says reasonably, appropriately, or potentially in the standards, then you can use judgment, but you especially can use it if you didn't do that, it would cause injustice or inequality. And it wants to guard against a set of rigid rules that would quickly become outdated. Now, here's the important part. It says the term reasonable means the prevailing professional judgment of psychologists engaged in similar activities in similar circumstances, given the knowledge that the psychologist had or should have had at the time. So what that means is if you were ever brought up on charges and then you said, well, I use judgment, unless the judgment you use suggested that other psychologists would do under the same circumstances, they would do something similar, then it may still be problematic. Now, I want to illustrate to you with this. This is an important standard for organizational psychologists, conflicts between ethics and organizational demands. The ethics code is not a rigid document. It changes over time. And this is a change that was made not too long ago in the code, and it had specific reasons for it. So the ethics code over time will change. Now, the APA code that you're asked to follow is currently under major revision. There is a committee called the ECTF, the Ethics Committee Task Force. I happen to be a member of that task force, and the charge to that task force is to revise the code so that it is visionary and transformational, that it still is a leading practical resource regarding ethics in science, education, and practice. And it maintains those aspects of the code that serves the public, plus the discipline and the profession. So the goal is to update it as a major overhaul and update of it. Now, these are areas we are going to talk about briefly this morning. These are ones that particularly cause challenges in consulting and IO psychology. Avoiding or minimizing harm. What does that mean? You know, what happens if somebody thinks they were treated unfairly by a test, or that they were fired as a result of report from a psychologist? The scientific basis of psychology, competence, informed consent, and so forth down the line. We're going to talk about several of these anyway. Now, this is what it says about avoiding harm. The standard, the enforceable standard, doesn't say do no harm. It says avoiding harm. And it says psychologists take reasonable steps to avoid harming their clients, students, blah, 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 organizational clients, and others with whom they work, and to minimize harm where it is foreseeable and unavoidable. So sometimes harm will occur to people as a result of our interventions, but we do our best to minimize it. And the flip side of that is we're always trying to maximize good. Now, here's some considerations to have about how you go about ethical decision-making. One, you want to start with the principles. What are the basic values that the code is telling you are important? Then you find the specific standard that applies to the concern. If there aren't any standards that apply, consider the principles as general guidance. And then you can also look at best practices from the literature. Now, this is the only case we'll have time to do this morning, but we're going to break out into breakout groups. We'll have about 6 minutes, I think, to work on this case. And basically, I want you to discuss it in your groups, and then we'll get a feedback from a few groups. So make sure you identify someone, if your group volunteers to report out, someone who will speak for your group. And then I want you to look at the situation and ask yourself, what do you think is the ethically appropriate thing to do? All right, ready? Here's the case. A coaching, you know, executive coaching and other kinds of coaching. So imagine you're an IO psychologist, you have a coaching client from another culture who wanted to give you a gift in appreciation of how much the coach had helped them. The gift was worth around $400 US. So it's not a small gift. The client said that she would feel honored for me, the psychologist, to have it, and indicated that she would be insulted if I did not accept it. So put yourself in that position and ask yourself, is it ethically appropriate for the psychologist and for you to accept the gift, and why? Whatever your answer is, why. So briefly discuss in your group, see if you can reach consensus. Yes, it's okay to do it. No, it isn't. And why? What part of the ethics standards do you think apply here? All right, can we go into our groups now? What should happen is you will be randomly assigned with a few other people to discuss this case, and it should cause you to just go into your group shortly.
Dear participants, once you are in the breakout room, feel free to choose a leader, and once you have discussed, later you may ask the leader to present the answer. Thank you.
I was put in a group, but I'm not gonna go in, but. Oh, we have a bunch who haven't joined yet. So you should see something pop up on your screen and just say yes to join the group, and that will get you in with the group.
We have 25 different rooms. Some of them have joined, so we're still waiting for the others.
Okay, it looks like a number have not accepted their invitation. Have we started the timer?
The participants, please feel free to join the breakout room again. The last reminder.
Like room 3, nobody's joined.
You just click on the screen. If you see join breakout room, just click accept.
If they missed it when it popped up, how do they join? So we have several groups that doesn't look like they've joined. How are we doing on time for the group?
The timer has already been started.
Yeah, now it's about 2 minutes.
2 minutes left. So are we gonna send them
No,
a
no, no,
message?
no, it's just 2 minutes now. I think
Oh,
we have
really?
5. Yeah,
Whoa.
Just started.
just started. Yeah.
Whoa.
So for those participants haven't joined in your breakout room, please join accordingly.
Those who to join room 3, room 4, feel free to join because the timer has started already.
Looks like group 17 has everybody it's supposed to. And 11, pretty big. So it says the time is up for the 6-minute breakout. Should we go ahead and close it?
Or what do you think?
I
Either
think
one-
yes. I think
Yes.
yes, because we're running low on time.
Yeah,
So
then
let's-
I think it's okay to close it. Yeah,
Okay.
Miss Pavitra, maybe you can close it.
All right.
and I saw 17 had most of the people in 11, so but I'll ask for volunteers.
Yeah,
briefly.
maybe you can ask for 17 to present.
Yes, I will. 17 and I think 11 had a lot. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask 17 first, and then whatever they do will go to any group that felt the opposite.
Right.
All right, are we all back now? Oh, 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Wow, it gives them another minute after it says so. And we still have people coming in the waiting room. Here we go. 5, 4. All right. So we can close the window here for the groups.
Yes, you can close it.
Okay.
Yes, Prof, you can close it.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good discussion. Those of you who were in the groups. I'm going to ask for a representative from group 17 to tell us what you came up with. Did you think it was okay to accept the gift, or should it not be accepted? Should not be? From group 17? We have someone to speak for 17? Well, let me ask someone from any group that felt that
Those
it
who
was,
joined room 17, please feel free to share your answer to Prof.
anyone?
Is there anyone?
Sir, I think it is not good to accept the gift because it may cause bias for the
Okay.
result. And I think that falls on principle A, the beneficence, or what? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So you indicated that your group indicated that you thought it might cause bias. And I can see that potentially would be an issue. That is, you might differentially treat a coaching client who pays you extra money. You may also prioritize that person or give them special favors back, maybe even without not intending it. Let me ask for a representative of any group or any individual for that matter who felt like it would be okay to accept it. Nobody? Okay, I think it's a tough situation to balance out. There are cultures where it might be customary to receive a gift. In this case, your primary obligation is as a psychologist. And if there's any chance that this would be problematic, you would need to politely not accept it, but also to explain the rationale for that and do it in a way that didn't offend them. But at the same time, you have obligations as a psychologist. Now, And I'm still sharing, right? There we are. Okay. I'm going to skip this poll and we're going to go on. One of the very important ethics standards is that we are psychologists, or you're in training to be a psychologist. And that means we base our judgments and our decision-making on scientific evidence and professional knowledge of the discipline. And what that means is we don't just do something because we think it's the right idea. We have to anchor it in the science and professional literature of our profession. Just as you probably would not want to go to a medical doctor who didn't keep up with the literature and hadn't read a journal article in years, so too we have obligations to base our judgment on science. And in psychology and IO psychology, science is changing continuously. There's lots of new literature, and you have to keep up to that. With that, this also is another important area. It's a part of competence, and competence says that we only work within our areas of competence, and that if we want to move to areas that are different from that, we have to properly train ourselves by going back to school or getting continuing education or whatever is appropriate to that. And when there's an area where standards don't yet exist, we are still very careful in moving into that area. In the case of assessments, which is one of the things that we do a lot of, we need to base our work on the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. I see on listservs a lot of time, what test should I use for X? Well, getting something off of a listserv is not an adequate basis to decide on using a particular assessment measure. You need to do the hard work and the research to find out if that's an appropriate measure for what inferences you are trying to draw on the basis of that assessment. It also says that you use tests only for the purposes for which they are validated. And if you use it for some new purpose, just like using medicine, a drug for a different purpose than what it was developed on, you have to have research evidence to support that new technique. Now, informed consent, very important aspect of your job as a psychologist. And this means in general that when we are working with people, we explain to them what is going to happen with the procedures that are the assessments or the interventions or whatever that is going to be used in language that is reasonably understandable to that person, except when you're mandated by government regulation to do so regardless of that. And you document that consent. Now, when you are working in an organization and you're, let's say the organization is your client, you still have to obtain informed consent from the people that you're working with. So the organization contracted you to do coaching with senior executives. Well, you still need to get their permission to participate in this type of work. And informed consent is something very important part of. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the code for you to really pay attention to when it comes to informed consent. This is called services delivered to or through organizations. And it says that if you're delivering as a psychologist services to or through organizations, you provide information beforehand to clients and when appropriate, those directly affected by the services about, and then here's this list, every one of these things. What are you doing? What's the nature? What's the purpose of it? Who is going to get these services? Which individuals are clients? What is my relationship as a psychologist with each person? For example, suppose I am consulting with a senior executive, but the client is the organization. And the board of directors, let's say, is concerned about the chief executive's behavior. And so my client is the organization, but I am coaching or assessing the CEO. I need permission from both of those groups as a psychologist. And if the CEO doesn't want to work, then I would not want to continue doing that because they didn't really give their consent, even though they were not the client. You also have to specify what uses are going to be made, what kind of information we have obtained, who's going to have access to that, and also the limits of confidentiality. If there is a limit of confidentiality, that is, I can't say to somebody, this is totally confidential if I have to report back to someone else in the organization. I have to tell them that up front. That is a limit of confidentiality. Now, there are lots of things. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We have 2 more minutes to conclude the session before the Q&A.
Okay. All right. I will wrap this up before the Q&A. There's a lot more that I'd like to cover, but we're going to give you a copy of the slides, which have other information that we haven't gotten to. But I want to talk about multiple relationships because these are something that are often not understood. As an industrial organizational psychologist, you are often going to be in this situation. This occurs when you're in a professional role with somebody, and at the same time, you're in another role with that person. For example, if I were in a professional relationship with a person that I was also, who was my spouse, that would be a multiple relationship. And I think you could see that would be bad and that would be wrong to do because you're not objective and so forth. Or you're at the same time in a relationship with a person closely associated. I'm going to coach somebody who's my wife's best friend. That would be an example of that. Or you promise to enter into a relationship in the future with somebody closely associated. What does that mean? Well, I will become a client of yours for a stock deal, and we'll end the coaching relationship. All of those are examples of multiple relationships. Also, if I have a relationship both with an organization and with employees, that's a multiple relationship. It's not per se bad, but what this says is you don't enter into such a relationship if it can reasonably be expected to impair your objectivity. Obviously, coaching your best friend, your spouse, you're not objective. Your competence or your effectiveness in performing his or her functions as a psychologist or otherwise risk exploitation or harm to the person with whom the relationship exists. Multiple relationships that would not reasonably be expected to cause impairment or risk exploitation or harm are not unethical. What this is saying is red flag. We need to really sort everything out up front if we're going to be in these complicated relationships where we have multiple reporting responsibilities or commitments to multiple parties, which happens a lot in the field that you are preparing to work in. Okay, we're going to stop at this point and open it up. I believe we're going to open it up to questions and answers, correct? Who's going to help with that? Can somebody assist here?
Okay. I think our our moderator is being kicked out from Zoom, so I will
Uh-oh.
moderate the sessions. Right. So okay, we are now open to Q&A session.
Hi,
So
I'm
hi, you are back.
yes, yes.
Right. Okay,
Sorry,
hand over to
Gopi.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Sunan. Yeah, if you have any questions, you may unmute or you
Are we getting some questions in chat box? What questions do you have about anything we brought up or about ethics more generally in this field? Anybody? Professors, do you have some for me? Well,
Okay. Yeah. There's one question here, right?
great.
So the question asking about what is the difference of ethics and morals?
Right. So not a lot. Morals are another word for describing what is right and wrong. What is different about individual morality, that is where you have a point of view, you have a set of values and so forth, you have particular moral things that you believe in. In professional ethics, it's not up to you. It is a profession that defines what the ethics of the profession are. And that is generally reached through consensual agreement of members of the profession acting through their representatives. And so once this code is in place, and maybe someday there'll be a Malaysian Psychological Association code for IO psychology and other applied areas. In the US, we just have one code for everybody, every type of psychologist. But once that's in place, that means you're responsible for that code. And if you're a member of the American Psychological Association, then if you don't obey the code, you can be brought up on charges for violating that. And then a jury, so to speak, of your peers would say that, yes, you did do this and there's going to be a punishment for that, or no, you didn't. But I can't just say, well, my morals are different from that. I have to say, did I behave in a way that was consistent with the code? Now, I've looked, and some of my colleagues have looked at psychology ethics from associations all over the world, and most of them are more alike than they are different. So it's not just consensus in one country. Psychologists in general tend to believe the same set of standards and the same principles apply. Ethics primarily are to protect the public, to protect those that we work with. And that's what it means, among other things, to be a professional. It means I agree to abide by this set of standards in my behavior. I agree to base my practice on research and knowledge. I agree to work for the betterment, to use my knowledge to better people, not to make them worse, to minimize harm to people when we're trying to make them better. I agree not to have sexual relationships inappropriately with clients, a long list of things. And that's what we say, well, that's part of our identity of being a profession. We agree, whatever we feel personally, we have to act and be in accord with the ethics of the profession that we are part of. Now, if we were in Canada, we would have a different ethics code that's a little bit different than some of the others. It's actually more strenuous than some of the others. But in general, they're all kind of saying the same thing. And that's what a professional code of ethics means. Other questions?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for the answers. But there are a few questions in the chat box. However,
Okay.
due to time constraint, I guess we can't proceed with the rest of the questions. But you may also answer it later on during the break time.
Okay.
Right. So thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for the sharing, for the interesting sharing. So for the participants, do not forget to sign out, especially for Utah students. You need to sign out in order to claim USSBC points. Right. So if you have any other questions, you may also type it in the chat box. And for those who are joining the second session, kindly join us back at 10:20 a.m. So we're going to resume the next session at 10:20 a.m. and we're going to have a 5 minutes toilet break as of now. So for those who have attended the first session, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the participation. We hope to see you again next time.
So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Yes, Prof. We will resume at 10:20 a.m.
And I need to sign out also?
I guess no need. We can just remain.
I'll just stay here. Is it the same link for the next one?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
Prof.
it's the
Yes,
same link.
the same link.
So it's okay to stay on?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. But the people on need to sign out so they can get credit and sign back in.
Yes. Those who are
Professor
joining the
Rodney?
second.
Is it
Yes.
possible when you are still there and we're waiting for others, you can answer my questions, please?
Yes,
My name is
where's your question?
Mustari. Yeah. My question is, if I'm doing the assessment for the employees, for the organizations, and when doing that, the employee asking me to have the results or the feedback about them. But in fact, the management would not like to share it to them right now. And what do you think according to the ethics? What should I do?
So the ethics stipulate in doing assessments that if feedback is not to be provided, that you tell people that up front. And so, and they have a right to participate or not participate under those circumstances. However,
Okay.
that said, I would say it is your job as a psychologist to work with management to understand why they don't want to give this feedback.
Yeah.
And there's literature that suggests that people are actually more favorably disposed to testing when they do get feedback. The fear by management is often that, oh, they're going to take legal action against us if they know, the results or whatever. Well, the obligation of the psychologist is to make sure that test is valid for the intended purpose. And so, providing feedback personally, I think it is better to do that than not to. From an ethical standpoint, you can not do it if people are aware of it up front. But I think as a psychologist, you want to say, but wait a minute, the literature suggests that people are going to like this better if they get feedback on the results afterwards.
Thank you. That's what I did. And I
Oh, okay.
told the management that people, the one that we assess, they have the right to know. Yeah, they have the right to know the results. And if we're giving it nicely, and by telling them, okay, this is the feedback, and by knowing ourselves, we know that how we can develop ourselves. So well, some of the management listen to that and agreed, and after, maybe not right away, so a couple months of that, and then they are conducting the feedback session. So yeah, the management called me again to give all the feedback, because they do not want to give the feedback by themselves, because maybe they cannot answer the questions why the feedback is like that. Yeah,
Right.
but again, not all the management buy the idea. So, but I just telling them. Okay.
Well, and I think when you are you an internal consultant or external?
External consultant.
Yeah. So, and a lot of times these things, there's some really good standards in there about what to do when there's a conflict between what the organization tells you and what your ethics tell you. But some things, so especially as internal consultants, it may take you a long time before they come around to it, but your job is to keep pushing it and say, well, people were upset because they never heard what happened and they didn't get the job and they think the test was responsible and so on.
Exactly.
But that's part of your job, is to help keep at it and be persistent.
Yes.
They were not asking you to do something unethical unless they told you, we're not going to tell them that there's no results, or it would be unethical to say you're going to get feedback and then they don't give it to you. That would be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you,
I'm going to
Professor.
just step out for 1 minute. I'll be right back. Great.
All right, this is just a gentle reminder to all the participants. If you have already signed in just now, you're not required to sign in again. But for those who have just joined, feel free to sign in using the link that will be provided in the chat box. And you're also reminded to keep your mobile phone in silent mode. And if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box, or you may also unmute and speak to us. So we will begin the next session in 1 minute. The link has been provided in the chat box. Feel free to sign in if you haven't done so. All right. Once again, a very good morning to everyone. And for those who have just joined, welcome to our webinar. And for those who have joined earlier, thank you for staying with us. Once again, I would like to remind you to keep your mobile phone in silent mode and to sign in. So once again, welcome. We are about to begin the second session titled as Creating and Sustaining Ethical Workplaces. So let me introduce our speaker for today, because for those who have joined, you might not know who is Professor Rodney, so I would like to introduce him. So he is a consulting psychologist, author, president of Lowman and Richardson Consulting Psychologists, and distinguished professor emeritus, California School of Professional Psychology, Alliant International University in San Diego, California. He has also held academic appointments at the University of Michigan, University of North Texas, Duke University Medical School, and the University of South Africa. Dr. Lowman is the author or editor of 13 books and monographs. He has edited or co-edited 3 journals, published over 130 peer-reviewed articles and journals, and he has also made hundreds of professional presentations all over the world. He is a fellow of 7 different APA divisions and currently editing the Fundamentals of Consulting Psychology book series published by the APA, and has edited 2 APA published journals. Moreover, he was the former president of the Society of Consulting Psychology and the Society of Psychologists in Leadership. He has also held several leadership roles in the APA and several universities. He is quite recognized authority on professional ethics and career assessment interventions. Last but not least, he has also consulted with many careers and organizational clients. So once again, Prof, we are really happy to have you here, and thank you for the sharing session. So ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I would like to invite all of you to turn on your webcam so that we can take a nice photo of ourselves. So feel free to turn on your webcam and our team will snap a photo.
We wait for others first, okay?
Just give you a few more seconds to turn on your webcam.
Okay, I think we should start. Okay, smile. Okay, another shot. Okay, smile. Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. Last one. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, done.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Iman, and thank you, participants. All right, so without further ado, let me invite Professor Rodney.
All right. Well, welcome back to those of you who were in the first session, and welcome to all those who have just joined us. In this talk, we're going to be talking about creating and sustaining ethical workplaces. And this is intended to be relevant for both managers and leaders, and also psychologists who work in organizations or who are studying organizations as well. Now, we have 3 major areas of focus. One is, what are the characteristics of ethical workplaces? How do they differ from ethically challenged ones? And how can ethical practices be sustained in an organization over time? I don't think anyone would disagree that we have been experiencing a worldwide crisis as a result of COVID since 2020, and no end yet is in sight. This has been associated with pervasive disruption. We've had chronic crises, economic and otherwise. Work has been reinvented. What we're doing now is how many of us do work these days. And it's also had chronic stress, mental health, and physical challenges. I don't think that's very controversial. What I'm going to suggest to you is that we are also experiencing a worldwide ethical crisis. And just to give you illustrations of that, I think we see ever widening gaps between the haves and the have-nots. We see exacerbated divisiveness among various groups, which seems to be getting worse and worse, not better, and doesn't seem to be limited to one country. We see versions of that happening all over. And also a greater willingness and tolerance of people acting in bad ways that adversely affect other people. Now, I would argue that there are specific ethical lapses we've seen in the instance of integrity, disregard for truth, lies and mistruths, moral regression, moral going backwards, corruption. We see massive corruption, disregard for others. That is been a problem forever, but it seems to be getting worse in many countries. We also have the very existential threat to our very existence of people and all people, and also of our planet, and also of those with whom we share the planet. Now, I'm going to ask you a pop poll here, and the question that I have for you is whether or not you think managers and psychologists can help organizations be more ethical. And rather than doing this as a poll, I'll just ask you to raise your hand in the chat box if you think that managers and psychologists can help organizations become, oh, we're going to do it on here. Okay, great. Do you think that managers and psychologists can help make the world a better place in terms of ethical behavior, addressing some of these problems that we've been hearing about? So let's go ahead and start that poll. Oh, I guess people have to sign. You have to join the myquiz.com. Looks like people are doing that.
Yes, Prof, we have people joining in, so maybe we can wait for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Participants, feel free to join using this game code so that you can participate in the poll.
All right, now it's time for you to vote. Do you think managers and psychologists can help organizations become more ethical? All right, we got a lopsided vote here. I'm impressed with the optimism. Okay, I think we have such a one-sided vote. I'm gonna call the question. Can we end the question now? I don't think I can do it from here. Can we go ahead and end the question? We see that the group as a whole, those of you who have voted are positive about that. And I agree with you. There's a lot we can do. So let's go ahead and show you some of the ways how. I'm going to try getting back to my shared screen. Okay. Okay. Now, there are those who prefer not to lead, coach, or consult in a crisis or deal with ethical issues, and there's some of us who love it. Why would you want to consult or lead during times of crisis, whether it's ethical or COVID crisis? Well, I would argue that it is easier to create change in times of crisis. You can, if it's done right, you can more easily unite people around a common mission. You can help make an organization stronger, and it's seldom boring. In my own case, I am one of those people who have specialized in, like being a manager, leader, or psychologist with startups and turnarounds. I've also been president or acting president of 2 universities, both in serious times of crisis. And startups are always filled with crises. Now, why workplaces are, why it's hard to create ethical workplaces and to sustain them over time has in part to do with the question of what we call levels. And that is, as consulting or organizational psychologists, or leaders or managers, we have 3 major areas or levels that we have to deal with. First are individuals, second are groups or teams, and lastly is the organization and system within which it's embedded as a whole. A book that I wrote is called An Introduction to Consulting Psychology, Working with Individuals, Groups, and Organizations. And in that book, we take each of those levels and talk about them and why they matter and that kind of thing. You can probably get this book through your university. And if your university subscribes to Psych books, it's available chapter by chapter to download through that. Now, what kind of issues do I mean with these levels? Well, at the individual level, for example, who is hired and who gets promoted has profound impact on whether you are going to be dealing with an ethical or an ethically challenged work environment. At the group level, teams of employees are an important factor to consider. Teams can be forces for good, or they can be forces for evil. That is, teams can be create their own norms, and they may be quite different than the norms of the organization as a whole. And at the organizational level, we have people who have enormous control and power over policies and over whether the organization is going to consistently be ethical or be dabbling in unethical behavior. Let us recognize that at the individual level, people differ as to their propensity to be ethical or unethical. People differ in the likelihood of their being influenced by others to behave unethically, and they differ in how they are likely to respond to requests or demands by an organization to act in a way that they consider not to be ethical. Managers also differ as people. Management is basically about making things happen, working with and through other people. It is content specific. Leadership has to oversee that, but leadership involves helping to take people to new and higher levels. If you're a leader you are more involved, not just in getting the product out the door, but helping people identify with their job, understand the why, not just the what. And leaders are especially called for in times of crisis and in times of turnaround. Teams also differ. Teams and work groups are where people live in the organizational context. That is, you're part of this large organization, but your day-to-day work, you're probably working with a smaller team. And the team can influence what individual members do or don't do. And teams can be a factor in promoting ethical behavior, but they can also be a powerful factor in promoting unethical behavior and putting pressure on those who don't want to go along with the unethical behavior. So team norms are a powerful influence. They may or may not be consistent with the norms of the organization. And similarly, at the organizational level, organizations differ. Some organizations espouse values and expect and demand ethical behavior. Some organizations espouse ethical values and ignore them in practice. And some organizations don't advocate any values and let people do what they want, or they just have a small one value like making profit and so forth, ignoring the many stakeholders that are involved with the organization. Organizations differ in the extent to which they reward ethical behavior and the degree to which they punish unethical behavior. Senior leadership can have the powerful influence on setting expectations for people in the organization. And also organizations differ in their policies. Do they have a code of ethics that is real and that is enforced? Do they make it easy for people to call out unethical behavior or to dissent when pressure is put on people to do things badly? Do they protect whistleblowers? Many don't. Being whistleblowers, if you know that literature, they often end up with very bad outcomes, even though they tried to do the right thing. So I'm going to bring up three major points about creating ethical environments. And these are prevention, accountability at all levels, rewarding ethicality, and punishing ethical transitions. And then we're going to talk about how to sustain that, and then we'll open it up for discussion afterwards. Now, prevention, like many things in life, if you can avoid having a problem, you should do whatever that takes, because you're going to pay a little bit of a price now and a lot less of one later. And if you don't do these things, you probably pay a price when things get rough. So first of all, prevention includes defining at the organizational level, what are the values of the company that are most important? What does it stand for? What do people at this company have to buy into if they're going to work here? Secondly, prevention can be helped by having a real organizational code of ethics and enforcement mechanisms. If you have that, that helps codify, just like in our earlier discussion, we were talking about ethics for psychologists. Organizational codes of ethics help codify what is behavior that is expected, required, and forbidden in an organization. But you can have all the organizational codes of ethics in the world, and if you don't enforce them, or you have highfalutin values that are not lived up to, that is worse than having none. So don't do these things unless you're actually going to take them seriously. We also can look at selecting for job-related ethicality. That is, we can look at ethical behavior as one of the criteria we use to select leaders to be in our organization, and to try to make sure that leaders and others who are hired are a match for the values of the organization. But all that is meaningless, as I said, if there is not accountability at all levels, starting at the top. Are employees held accountable for their behavior? If the organization says, we expect you to be honest and reliable and to be upfront about things, and the senior management are not, just like with parents, children look to what parents do, not what they say, to see what is acceptable behavior. Secondly, is there a fair and fairly administered process for adjudicating ethically problematic behavior? If you're going to have standards, you have to have consequences for not obeying those standards. But at the same time, if you're going to have that system, it needs to be fair and honest and judiciously administered, oftentimes by HR or by a senior part of the organization. If it's not seen as credible, if it's filled with cronies and the high level people get off and the others don't, then that's a problem. A third issue is in business or government or any kind of organization that has a mission, usually we're all over the place trying to measure whether we're successful with that mission. Well, is the organization collecting and reporting regularly on indicators of ethicality? Well, what kind of indicators? Well, how many ethical complaints were there made? Were there legal things that happened that indicated problematic behavior? How are we tracking that over time? Are we getting better in that? And if we're not doing well, what do we collect? What do we learn from the data about what we need to do differently? I would also add, and this is a little bit tricky, but are there mechanisms that allow confidential reporting of ethical concerns? Oftentimes people are afraid to report on problem behavior that they see happening in their part of the organization or in the large part of the organization. Is there a way for employees who see problematic behavior, such as corruption or whatever, to report that to somebody who can do something about it? And then lastly here, we want to focus on rewarding ethical behavior and punishing unethical behavior. One question to ask is, we do all kinds of work measuring how people feel about a company or government agency, a politician, et cetera. Do we measure how various stakeholders perceive the organization as being ethical, or is its reputation one for being unethical? And what happens to those who behave unethically, even if they're courageous and they speak up about it? Do they get rewarded, or, as is more commonly the case, do they get punished or fired? And do bad actions get recognized, identified, and acted on quickly? It is everybody in the organization typically knows when senior leadership is misbehaving, and if they see them getting away with murder, and the smallest infraction of people lower in the organization don't get any fairness in the process of adjudicating that, then the organization has communicated that it does not believe in being ethical, and it can expect that people are going to react adversely to that. Now, let's talk about what it's like to work in an unethical work environment. If any of you have had experience of working in a corrupt organization or with corrupt officials who may have later been removed, you know that it tends to create anxiety and uncertainty for employees. There is a great amount of energy that goes into people fearing retaliation from bad actors or lack of support from management. Just keep it quiet, don't talk, you just do your job, don't worry about it. That doesn't work very well. It's oftentimes divisive. Some people feel like this is fine the way it is, and others say, no, this company's in serious trouble. And then often, as you can imagine, this kind of behavior, this kind of angst usually comes at the expense of the work to be done in the organization. Now, I use this only partially humorously, but beware of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Ethically challenged people, particularly at senior levels of management, can be very charismatic. But charisma can be positive to a point. It can also be very problematic, because a charismatic person is often, that characteristic is associated with narcissism, and the charisma is kind of skin deep, but they perceive anybody who disagrees with them oftentimes as being an enemy and somebody that has to be dealt with in a negative way. If you can keep from hiring, especially in senior leadership positions, people who have the potential to be ethically challenged, even if everybody loves them on the interview because they're so socially engaging and so forth, you will save a lot of problems for the organization later. And so make those decisions carefully when you're hiring senior people, if you want to have an ethical organization. Of course, it's not enough just to be ethical. You also have to be competent in the job to be done. But hiring mistakes at the senior level, especially, but in all parts of the organization, when it comes to ethicality, can be a problem. Now, say a little bit more about this. Most managers and leaders are not narcissistic, and they're not neurotic on various scales. However, a study by Goldstein et al. In 2017 in the United States, an epidemiological study, found that the incidence level of antisocial personality disorder was 4.3%, and of adult antisocial behavior without conduct disorder before the age of 15 was 20.3%. That's a pretty big chunk of people. And if you hire those people because they seem so wonderful and so forth, but they really have an underlying antisocial personality or narcissistic personality, it can cause a lot of grief. Now, we've talked a little bit about the cost of unethicality, and I think that people look, especially if they're not in high levels position, they look for their managers and their leaders for direction and for help in getting through this situation. Now, we've talked about creating ethical environments and some of the things that can be done there. Let's briefly talk about the basics of sustaining ethical environments. Here, I want to make 3 points. One is, it is important to enforce rules promptly and visibly. Secondly, auditing performance on ethical goals, which implies you should have ethical goals for the organization. And thirdly, making it safe for people to speak up. Now, if an organization is serious about ethical and avoiding unethical behavior, employees need to know that, and it can't just be lip service. They need to see that when people do bad things, they are punished for it, whether those people are in the chief executive's office or they're in the lowest levels of the organization. Conversely, it is important to reward employees who are acting in an ethical way, especially when they're acting in a way that puts their own well-being at potential harm. In time, the people in the company then will learn that the company is serious, that they want to be known as an ethical company, and their actions say it, not just their words. Remember also that even a single lapse of a ethical malfeasance that was tolerated or not dealt with appropriately, that can take a long time to recover from. Again, prevention and action. Secondly, It is helpful if organizations can set up ethical goals. You're not going to be perfect in this, but measure what it is and follow it over time and take corrective action when it's needed. You want to share the results of those kind of outcome measures widely within the organization, celebrate when there's something to be celebrated, and seek input from people in the organization as to how to make things better. It's like anything. If you want to control it, measure it, figure out what you should be measuring and what the results mean. You set up a process group to help with that and so forth, but take it seriously, not just one time a year. Make it a serious part of every day. The third point was making it safe to speak up. Now, it is important to make sure that those who identify legitimate ethical problems in an organization are well protected and treated fairly. Now, there are people that sometimes make complaints about ethicality that are doing it for wrong reasons, but we're talking about people who are whistleblowers, people who bring stuff to the attention that maybe management or people in the organization don't want to deal with. Those are people who in many ways should be heroes because they're helping the organization identify an ethical problem area that needs to be dealt with. Now, another way to try to encourage safety is to create anonymous or confidential reporting channels. Those have to be done very carefully. If you're going to have an ombudsman, for example, that can be a good thing, but it's important to make sure that these are highly ethical people with impeccable credentials who are taken seriously by the organization, because there can be many possibilities of people being wounded or fired or worse if they called into attention things that are being done bad and unethically. We also need to intervene in teams because there can be peer pressure, and somebody who has reported something going on bad in the organization can be really treated badly and unfairly by the people around them. You also can consider making it a duty to report. In the United States, we have something called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act for for-profit organizations, and it requires if people in the organization are aware of financial malfeasance, they have a legal obligation to report that. It also requires that a certain type of organization also put in place a code of ethics. Second point was auditing performance on ethical goals. That assumes you have them. So create goals. You don't have to be perfect, but if you want to make sure you reach something, define what it is that you're trying to reach, figure out what the best measure of that is for that organization. Could be, for example, how many disciplinary actions did we have? The American Psychological Association, for example, reports by name, state, location, anybody who is kicked out of the APA for ethical malfeasance and says why they were kicked out. So how many people every year did that happen to? It's a very small number in the APA. Share the results widely, as I said earlier, celebrate when warranted, and figure out how to make it better with the input of a lot of people. And we've also talked about these factors as well. Now, I also want to kind of wrap things up and open it up to discussion soon. When you're communicating in a crisis, whether it's ethical or not, there are a few recommendations that we can add. In organizations that have made it very difficult for ethical malfeasance to be identified, and then the organization starts falling apart because its senior leadership has done really bad things, you can imagine what kind of anxiety there is within the organization. And here's three communication tips that I would offer for communicating in a crisis type situation, whether it's ethics or COVID or whatever. ABC, acknowledge the fear, pain, and uncertainty. B, which a lot of organizations don't do very well, but we should be ruthlessly factual and accurate. Tell people where things stand, what is being done, what the plan is to move from point A to point B. And 3, comfort people with a vision and hope for the future from the actions being taken. In other words, help people see, yeah, things are really bad now, it's going to get better, but only say that if it really is. So your job as a manager then, as a manager, is to facilitate responsible, ethical, and goal direction action. Now, I want to speak just briefly about your job as a psychologist. Your job as a psychologist is speaking up and acting on ethical issues. It's staying true, no matter what. If you're a psychologist in an organization, you are still a psychologist. You are still bound by your ethics code. So stay true to those ethical obligations and help advise the organizations how to behave ethically. Another thing is speaking truth to power. Psychologists are often, especially if you're an external consultant, but even as an internal one, you're in a pretty powerful platform to be able to speak up about what the consequences of things are. Say what others may not be in a position to say, sometimes the psychologists can say, and be an ethical role model by the fact that you take ethics seriously, you make clear to other people, including your supervisors, the ethical standards that you are required to behave. Now, I mentioned these 2 standards for the psychologist in the group, and these are ones that tell you that if there is a conflict between ethics and law, regulations, or other governing legal authority, what you need to do. And then 1.03 tells you what happens if there is a conflict between your ethics and what the organization tells you you have to do. And your obligation is to make clear your adherence to the ethics code and to take reasonable steps to try to resolve the conflict. It also says that it is never okay to use this standard to try to defend violating people's human rights. Okay, wrapping up, what are the expectations of psychologists? What are the expectations of managers? Well, this list on the left are the things we're required to do: doing good, minimizing harm, acting ethically, accepting responsibility, enhancing fairness, maintaining confidentiality, showing respect, and so forth. But as a psychologist, you're often the only person in the room who is required to do that. And the organizational context, they are not required to follow psychology ethics. They may have expectations that differ from you, may have mixed views about ethical consideration. Well, part of the job is to try to bring those together. Let's say you're an HR IO psychologist working in HR, you're in a great position to help navigate some of those areas and try to use your expertise to make the organization be more effective. Now, I would also encourage you to become known for your ethicality, speak up when they're, as a psychologist, but as a manager too, speak up in the face of unethical behavior, use the ethics of your profession as leverage, knowledge and research findings. I mean, when something works and it's been proven to work, that can be a powerful incentive. Help build coalitions within the organization, and then analyze, I can't see this, but hopefully you can read it there. Now, here's a couple of resources for the psychologist attending. There's a book by Joel Lefkowitz I would recommend called Ethics and Values in Industrial Organizational Psychology. There's this red book that I mentioned earlier, An Introduction to Consulting Psych. And then there's a book I did with Stuart Cooper that is called The Ethical Practice of Consulting Psychology. Those two books, the red one and the purple one, those are available likely through your library on their your university library and their research databases if they subscribe to the APA book resource. So I'm going to, well, let's ask again. We're going to end by, do you think you personally, not just psychologists in general, but do you think you personally can help organizations become more ethical, whether you're a psychologist or a manager? And let's do that poll as we move from this to Q&A time. Do we have that one set up? Here we go. All right. Same drill as what we started with here. Here we go.
So participants, this is the last poll for today. So we hope you can really join to answer Prof's question. So feel free.
All right. Do you think you personally can help organizations become more ethical? Is that well, I think we've got the results here, and I'm pleased to see that the majority has said yes, they do feel like they can help an organization to become more ethical. And as for those who thought that they could not, well, let's hope you learn more about ways that can happen, because we think that everybody has the potential to do that, and especially people who are psychologists or managers and leaders. All right, so let me just bring back my slides here. I have to quickly go to the end here. Okay, we just did that. All right, so now before we do this, I want to just give you my email address, which is shown here. If you'd like to contact me, we will have a copy of the slides as a handout that those who came to the talk will have access to. And then we have some time now for discussion, and whatever you'd like to ask about or disagree with or suggest an alternative perspective, let's open it up.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. So participants, this is Q&A time. So if you have any questions, you can unmute and speak to us, or you can also type it in the chat box. But before we begin the Q&A session, I would like to remind you to fill in the feedback form. You can use the link that has been attached to the chat box. While we are going on with this Q&A session, you can fill in this feedback form. Thank you.
So they can also write in the chat box, correct?
Yes, yes, Professor. Yes.
Okay. All right. Something in the chat box.
Prof, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so because you've done consulting before in many countries, I suppose, right? In a situation where a company asking you to conduct a certain program that's supposedly helping the organization and their people, but you know for sure that you've heard also from other people saying, oh, this company doesn't do anything, so they're just doing it for the sake of doing it, or a requirement of their KPI or something, but you know they're not going to do it. So if that's the case, do you still do the job as they ask, or did you just said like, well, the situation is, you know, they're not going to do anything, so you don't even like wanna do it. So what is your take on that?
So thank you for that great question. And that's a situation that does come up sometimes. And remember, an organization is composed of many players, so it's often the case that some people want to do something and other people don't. But if you really feel that they really have no interest in doing this, that they're going to open up a process that is going to make things worse rather than better. That is, you're going to come in, get people interested in change, et cetera, and then it's going to hit a brick wall and they're just going through the motions. Then personally, if I were doing that, I would probably not do the job unless I felt that there would be the possibility of some action moving forward where they would have better understanding, et cetera. But I think one of the first things about undergoing a change process as a consultant is to ask, are they ready for change? And readiness for change is a very important factor. If they're not, and particularly if the management is not ready for change, then I would say proceed with great caution. Or maybe you can redesign the change to say, look, you're not really ready for what you ask for. I would rather we do X, like we do an exploration, we do a survey of what people's attitudes are and survey feedback. And then we'll decide whether the intervention that you had in mind is something that would work. A lot of times companies, not unusually, we're all like this in some ways, but they're looking for a quick fix. And a quick fix oftentimes doesn't work when you're trying to address a difficult problem. So I would say if you're in that situation, proceed with caution if you proceed at all. Also, as consultants, we need to be willing to fire clients, if they're not doing anything that is good, or if they're doing bad things with our work, you don't have to continue working with them, especially if you're an external client. But our goal is to help make organizations better. So obviously they're not perfect or they wouldn't be seeking out help. So see if you can find something and enough people, particularly at the senior level, to work with to at least help move them forward a bit. But change in organizations can have adverse consequences. I think that's part of what's being suggested by the question, and you want to avoid that if possible.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that.
For the question.
What is your most, there's a question in the chat box I see, what is your most challenging task when you work with different cultures? Gosh, there's so many. And just where I live here in San Diego in California, we have cultures many different cultures. You know, we have Latino Americans, we have Latinos from many different countries in Central and South America. We have community of people from Israel. We have communities of people from other areas in the Middle East. We have a huge Filipino population and so forth. I think the question is, what kind of assessment or intervention are we doing, and to what extent is that influenced by the culture of the individual? For example, because of the internet and because of COVID, frankly, we can do coaching with people all over the world. But should we do coaching with people all over the world if we are not competent in a particular culture? To a certain extent, corporate is a culture, but there also are a lot of things that are affected by the specifics of your situation. For example, with working with people in a corporate setting who are from countries where most of the population does not have economic stability, and they're the person in the family who has responsibilities to help out their family members, and they want to talk about some of the conflict they have over that. You know, that's something you really need to better understand what that culture is and expectations are before you just blandly make suggestions about what should be done or shouldn't be done or whatever. We can't be experts in every culture, but we can be experts who understand the type of issues that culture affects in the context of what we are doing. And then I think we have to make judgments in conjunction with the people we are potentially going to work with as to whether or not we or somebody else is a better match for the particular consulting task. There are also, of course, multiple cultures often represented in an organization and a group that we may intervene with in an organization. And sometimes those differences really matter, and those differences need to be dealt with. Remember that as a psychologist, our ethical obligations are to be competent in what we do. And if we are undertaking work with a culture with which we have limited experience, then we need to either decide we're not the right one for that, or we need to work with somebody who is, as a possibility where we can partner as a team of consultants, or we need to help them find somebody who's more appropriate. Any other questions? I don't see any others on chat. Any others that people want to ask? I think our time is running out here.
Is there any questions? You may type it in the chat box.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure to speak with you virtually. Maybe someday we'll get to do it in person if that time ever opens up again. And it's just delightful to be with you and to hear your questions and your thoughts as we have gone through this. So thanks. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Prof. I guess there are no more questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you so much for addressing this interesting topic today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I believe it is an eye-opener to our participants, really, and I do hope that we can meet you again in yet another great session like today.
That would be fun.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for your time and support. If you have any questions, you may also type it in the chat box, or you can contact Professor using the email that has been sent earlier. hope you had a great time. And before we leave, I would like to request you again to complete the feedback form. And for Utah students, please do not forget to sign out in order to claim your USSBC points. Right. So yeah, I guess that's it. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day and stay safe.
Okay. So should I stay on for a minute, or are we done?
Yes, Prof, we are done, but I'm not sure if anybody is going to have any other questions.
Okay.
So far, that's done.
Okay. So thanks for your help with the with the process and all the stuff that went on today. That was real helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof, for a wonderful sharing session just now. Yeah,
Well,
actually,
thank
we
you.
learned a lot of things. Yeah.
I appreciate the invitation. I enjoyed it, and look forward to further contact. So
yeah, just for information, Prof Rustari is our external exam, for our program Master of Psychology. Right. Yeah, she is with us today, and just now she also addressed some of the questions.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for the questions.
All right. So because from a participant also, we have some participant from Indonesia, from Philippines, from China. Yeah, a few country around Asian context. Yeah.
Great. I have spent some time in the Philippines and several trips there, and also a little bit of time in China. China, not very much.
Right. All right. So I think should be that's all for today. We will keep contact via email, and maybe we can have other sessions together in future.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Good night, everybody. Well, good day.
Yeah, good day for us.
Good night here.
Yeah, good night, Prof.
Okay, good night.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So are we staying or leaving, Sultan?
Yeah, I will just stay for waiting for everyone to leave the meeting first.
Yeah, I think some of them are still filling in the form.
All right. Maybe we can close the Zoom meeting at 11:25, right? And for committee, maybe later we can have a meeting in Zoom empty, okay, for the following tasks.